Stop scrolling. Stop scrolling. We got some important information for you today. What's going on? How y'all doing out there? Turn the music up. Turn the music down. This is your brother Shabazz. This is the proper perspective. We're going to get started in a few moments. We're talking about color today. Colorism, so to speak. The real ancient Egyptian colors and the real Kemetic identity. If that don't grab you. The dark-skinned white Egyptian myth is being exposed. Not that it hasn't already been exposed, but we're going to cover it in a little bit more detail today. How Eurocentrism and sometimes even Arab centrism erases black identity. So what's going on, everybody? This is your brother Shabazz. This is the proper perspective. Y'all know if this is your, well, you might not know. If this is your first time checking out the channel, do me a favor, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. And when you hit the subscribe button, the bell pops up and you get to choose all or personalize. Now, if you know the game, you know the game. If you click personalize, you ain't gonna get these notifications. So click all. And that way, every time I post a video, every time I go live, you'll get a notification. If you hit personalize, then you letting YouTube decide whether or not they want to send something to you. So go ahead and hit those buttons. Hit all the buttons and keep that algorithm bouncing. But this is your brother Shabazz. And we're talking about ancient Egypt today. We're talking about Kemet. We're going to talk about the pharaoh, the black revolutionary. We're going to talk about Akhenaten. So now again, if this is your first time, and you happen to join in live, drop something in the chat. Let me know where you're listening from. What city, what state, what nation. Now here's a question for you. Because I didn't quite know this. Did you know that ancient Egyptians never had a word for brown? Do you care that ancient Egyptians never had a word for brown? That's the question. We'll circle this back a lot today. So that's the question we asking. That's the type of time we on today. If you're joining in, like I said, let me know where you're tuning in from as we get this ball started, as we get this show on the road. So again, that question, I didn't know it. I kind of sort of knew a little something, but I ain't know all the particulars. So yeah, it was brought to my attention that not only do they not have a word for brown, but their concept of black encapsulated in that word that a lot of us find rather interesting, Kim, meant something entirely different from what a lot of people think today. Because there are people that will tell you they talking about dirt. Well, what if everything that you have been taught, like many other things in this world, was a misnomer? What if everything that you've been taught about their skin color, about their identity, and the way historians talk about race in and of itself, what if you were to discover that it's built on shaky, Eurocentric foundations? Hopefully you stick around, because we're going to unravel these truths. We're going to shatter the falsehoods. And we're going to put the puzzle pieces back together so you get the real picture. Because we always got to be ready to challenge the false narratives that float around the internet and float around the halls of academia. That's any and all false narratives. Today we're dealing with ancient Egyptian false narratives. But if you are familiar with this channel, you know we hit all kinds of false narratives. So now I'm gonna introduce to you. Let me see if I can pull this up on the screen. Because there's a brother who got me inspired a bit. I want to shout out that brother, and I want to show you what I mean. So let me share the screen. Okay, there we go. Not quite the way I wanted it to show, but let's see. All right, there we go. A little bit better. Even better. There we go. Make sure you can check this out. So there's a brother by the name of Medew Neter, and his perspective is what inspired this discussion. So I give a shout out to him, salute to him. If y'all want to support, if you know what's right, then you should support him so you can check out his page. I'm going to read a little bit of what he said before I dive in to my own take. Because he posted this, and you can see it on the screen. It hit that curiosity nerve in me. He was breaking down how the Medew Neter uses Kim to describe everything from cows to deities, even when the image looks brown to our modern eyes. And he wasn't doing it for shock value. He was showing how ancient Egyptians, the Kemetic, defined themselves without any of the modern racial categories people keep trying to glue on to them. Now that post of his is what pushed me into the rabbit hole that I'm about to take you through, so buckle up. Now, point of clarity, I gotta say this and I gotta stress this. His post got me thinking. He was showing how ancient Egyptians described themselves on their own terms, without the modern racial categories that people keep projecting onto them. Now, that's to some extent, that's the end and all of it. I'm not what I'm about to say is not necessarily what he was saying. My own perspective goes a little further. I very much lean into approaching the ancient term Kim in relation to how Black identity is understood today through the hue we all know and love. That is my interpretation. I'm not saying it is his. His post simply inspired the direction that I took. But I'm gonna read what he said into the record, so to speak. So, let me see. Maybe I can get this a little bit wider. Let me see. If I can get it a little bit bigger so you can see it. Okay, that's definitely bigger. Now let me do this. I'm gonna come off the screen. I think I'm gonna come off the screen. Well, that's better. So you can see it a little bit better now. Get all this stuff out the way. So here we go. Medew Neter, that's the brother's name. And he says, I laugh at race theorists who like to say that Nile Valley Africans are brown skinned, not black. It's so funny. Now I agree with him. And with this, lock, stock, and barrel. He says, guess what? There is no word for the color brown in the Medew Neter. They describe themselves as Kim, despite being brown or dark brown or black. That's me. That's not him. I'm adding that phrase or black. Now he says, rightfully so, people are taking modern racialized thinking and colorism to try and explain blackness for people who lived thousands of years ago. This is insane. This is moronic. We master the Medew Neter today. We master the Medew Neter language and primary sources so we can know what they themselves thought of their color, not what colonial racial categories mean to them. Now that's the phrase that got me really going. Not what colonial racial categories mean to them. Because always and forever, whether you agree with or disagree with anything I say, whether you agree with or disagree with how modern Egyptology wants to handle classifications and interpretations, recognize this. All of their classifications, they always come attached to a value system. It is the value system that I personally will attack and debunk anytime, any chance I get. Not necessarily the racial categories. That's going to be important. It'll all come back to you a little bit later. But enough of my digression. So Ordul Neter points out in photo 1, and let me show it to you. So you see here, photo 1, the brown cow. He says, in photo 1, the Egyptian cow is not jet black. At least not to a modern thinker. We know what jet black looked like in the crayon box. The Egyptian cow is brown, but they don't have a word for brown. So what do they call it? This cow is called Kem, black, to an Egyptian Kemetic, to an ancient Kemetic. Now in photo number 2, as you can see, now if you're not too sure, well, you see 3 similarly depicted complexioned individuals. On the left, I may get this wrong. On the right is Anpu, most people say Anubis. In the middle is the Pharaoh, and on the left is Heru. Many people say Horus. But what's of note is you see the complexions are the same. And Ordul Neter points out, in photo 2, Heru is brown. But to the ancient Egyptians, he is Kemwir. That's K-M-W-R, if you can see it on the screen. Which means great black. They call Heru Kem, the black one. So in both cases, both brown and dark brown are designated as Kem, black to the ancient Egyptians. Whether they are characterizing people or real world, third dimension, non-human objects. They did not have a term for brown. The color brown itself was an extension of Kem and Desir. So I laugh at race theories. Now, so again, I say shout out to, big up, much respect to brother Ordul Neter for making this post, pointing this out, and it does inspire what I'm about to say. Now, with that said, because like I said, now that's what he said. So you understand what we're about to do. So just imagine you being a student of ancient Egypt, diving into the rich language of Medew Neter. You learn that ancient Egyptians described themselves as Kem, not just, what is that? Okay, no. Not just as the color black. What you will find out, what you begin to discover is, for them, Kem was cultural, Kem was spiritual, Kem was a literal identity that embraced a spectrum of darker hues. Now, as Ordul Neter pointed out, there was no word for brown because they didn't see themselves as brown. Now, we today, clearly, obviously, we have a word for brown. But here's the thing that really got me going. We don't typically, hold on, let me turn this music off. Somebody said I can't hear you too well. I don't know how true that is, but just for the case of prosperity. So again, today we have a word for brown, clearly. Now one could say that in today's world, it's becoming more and more common to refer to some black people as brown. There are some groups of black people that will say, I'm not black, I'm brown. And then you have the people, maybe the multiculturalists, if that might fit the word, that will say, we are both black and brown. But then there are others who will say, well, the black people are those African descendant type folks, regardless of the nomenclature that you use. You know, some of us, we are still living amongst people who are of the older and elder generations that lived during a time period where they called themselves colored. And some of them doesn't have a problem with it. We're still living in a time period where some generations still refer to themselves as Negro, and they don't have a problem with it. But we all know and recognize, for the most part, that this is a black thing. And they would then therefore say that the brown people might be those of Latino descent. A little bit. I'm not being hard and fast with this rule because this ain't really the point. I'm just trying to build and stack so that we get onto the same page. So, yes, we got a word for brown. And sometimes some of us use brown interchangeably or instead of black to describe ourselves, our hue, our complexions. We use it as a color marker for us, whether we be black, black American, black Canadian, Africans on the continent, or in the diaspora, the Caribbean, the British, the American, the Canadian, et al. All of it. But just like us today, for the most part, I'm trying to couch this correctly because I know somebody would be like, you don't know what you're talking about, or in some other kind of way. Try to jump on the attack mag. Now, I know, speaking of the attack ban, I know the FBA crowd is delineating. But that notwithstanding, we all generally see ourselves as black people, not brown, even though we know we have brown pigmentation when subjected to the eyeball test. No, I'm not blind. I mean, I got some eyesight problems. I'm wearing glasses, but with or without them, I can tell the difference between the crayon black and the crayon brown. What I am saying here is the Kemetic people back then were just as unified or just as united under the term Kim as most of us are today, united under the term black, at least racially speaking, ethnicities notwithstanding. This is not a conversation. We could get into that later, but this is not a conversation about various distinct and unique ethnicities. So fast forward from back then to now, modern racial categories, because that was the phrase that got me going, the colonial racial categories. Whether we say brown, whether we say tan, whether we say white, are imposed on ancient identities. But the value system that is embedded and attached to these racial categories were, in one sense, foreign to the Kemetics themselves, to the Kemetiu, to the ancient Egyptians. Now, let me be clear. When modern commentators insist on labeling ancient Egyptians as brown, when they are trying to divide them into racial categories, they're not just being imprecise. They are actively obfuscating the truth. This is me now. Remember, I'm not assigning this interpretation and this discussion to the brother Ordul Neter. I don't think he is necessary. He might he might tell me, you got it all wrong, Phil. What I'm saying is ancient Egyptians recognized a spectrum of darkness, of dark hues, of darker hues, all under a single unifying identity. Kim. Modern racial theorists may argue about shade. Modern racial theorists may argue about tone. But in doing so, they muddy a system. They muddy the waters of a system that was already clear back then to those who were living it. And to ignore this is to dismiss the evidence that our ancestors left behind in language, art, and culture. And that dismissal is both intellectually lazy and ideologically motivated. Let's see what this is. So, every time I go live, I start getting text messages. So let me see. Let me pause just for a second because somebody is. Where is? I thought I had I know I had it here somewhere. Somebody is asking me to send them a link. So if I can find the page, and I probably can't real quickly. Okay, so found the page. And let me send the link, and then we will get back to the show. So now we got that clear. To ignore, to dismiss is intellectually lazy and ideologically motivated. Ideologically motivated. Well, whose ideology are they being motivated by? That's what we're going to really get into. Now, you may have heard the claim. You may have heard the claim that ancient Egyptian men were painted dark red and ancient Egyptian women were painted light yellow in their art as a gender code. Now, again, to borrow a phrase from the brother, I laugh at racial theorists. This is what is hilarious. I remember a time sitting in a classroom and I had a professor telling me, and this is what we're going to get into. He said the ancient Egyptians were not black. They were dark-skinned white people. That's what really gets me going. But aside from that, they like to say this gender code, dark men and light women. Now, is this really true? This old theory is often presented as fact. And it's funny because they say it with such haughtiness and such scholarly demure because they're trying to mind trick you. But it's an oversimplification at best. It might be an apologetic. It might be a polemic. It is absolutely a myth used to obscure Kemetic blackness. Now, we're going to get into a very specific example. If y'all saw the thumbnail, then you know who the very specific example is. Let me see if I can pull that brother's picture back up. Because I want him on the screen as I talk about him. And again, I thought I had it. And apparently, I do not. So let me see. Let me get the presentation. Here we go. So we're going to talk about that pharaoh named Akhenaten. That's what we're talking about. So we're going to take Akhenaten, the Insubiti, who, well, before I make my statement, let me prepare. Because now the Eurocentric and oftentimes the Arab-centric crowd will say that he broke away from the conventions of the day, that he broke away from, that he rebelled against the customs of the culture in order to demand realistic portrayals of himself. Now, they also say it about his spiritual aspirations. We're not going to get into that just yet. I'm going to deal with that on another one because that's coming too. But whether you concede, and I'm not saying that I do, but whether you concede that he broke away from conventions and standard cultural norms, or you challenge that, the fact that he demanded realistic portrayals of himself challenges the idea that skin tone was symbolic or formulaic all throughout Kemetic history. And this is what they try to indoctrinate us on. So now we begin the real pushback. I find it funny. If you haven't already caught my mocking tone, let me be clear. I find it funny that they like to parade this myth around dark men and light women because it allows them to move away from the mythology of dark-skinned white Egyptians after they were publicly humiliated and shamed by what is most often called Afrocentric scholasticism, which in all reality and in all practical terms is just the frickin' truth of the matter. So they had to give up the dark-skinned white myth. But as y'all know, as white supremacists always do, and not just the white supremacists, all the other hodgepodge committees of anti-black ideologues, what they most assuredly do, when they lose ground, they go back, they revamp. They never surrender. They just try to get a little bit more tricky with their wordings. And thus enter dark man, light woman mythology. It's just the sidestep that allows them to change the name and keep playing this same game. And so the point is, or the problem is, when we get to Akhenaten, this brother was so impassioned. And now some out there might say, he was obsessed. Okay. I don't care. It ain't no, don't harm me none. He was impassioned so much with ensuring that his portrayals were realistic. Now, one could actually say, try this one on for size. Instead of, because all the others, all the scholarship centers around, all of the mainstream, all of the primary scholarship centers around Akhenaten representing the first jab, the first stab, the first attempt at monotheism. Now, not that I beg to differ, I don't like begging anyhow, but I shall differ. I rather say he was perhaps the first representation of realism. Clearly, long before, centuries before, the European culture had an idea and had an era that they called realism. You know, oftentimes once you do the research, you find out they weren't the first at anything anyhow. But because Akhenaten was going to make sure whoever did his work, whoever did his portraits, whoever did his statues, he was going to make sure that they got him right. You know, it's not dissimilar from the same way we do today in our society. No matter where we at, if somebody says, hey, take a picture, we are quick to say, wait a minute, get my good side. Get the right angle. Why? So that anybody that might happen to look at the picture, yeah, they would see us in our best light, but they would see us in such a way that there can be no confusion as to who is the person in the picture. The precise version of who we are. No room left for stylistic, creative, caricature, symbolic differentiation, which is what they like to say about ancient Egyptian art. At least for most of us. Yeah, we got some people that get a little fanatic with the filters and get a little obsessed with the gloss over. But that's a conversation for another day. Akhenaten wanted an exact image. And if I were daring enough to say, or I'll give you another example. Let's say me, yes, little old humble me, if I want to create a statue of me in my little small neck of the woods here in Richmond, Virginia, where I live in my little small neighborhood, and I wanted to go downtown in the middle of the broad street, and I wanted to set in the middle of the road some type of configuration or statue of me, I would want it done in such a way where there can be no mistakes, no confusion as to what I look like. This is realism. Anybody that saw the statue, there's absolutely no way they would ever walk away from that statue saying, I'm not sure. Is that Shabazz? I don't know. Because it would be the exact image. It would be the spitting image. That's the realism that I would want. That's the realism that Akhenaten was wanting. And he was paying. He was the man in charge. He was commissioning this work. He wanted it on the documented record for anybody that ever came across his picture, his statue, his image. They would know exactly what he looked like. This is the proof that ancient Egyptians were not altogether entirely concerned with symbolic color coding. At least nowhere near as much as the Eurocentric, and unfortunately, the Arab-centric scholars try to make it out to be more often than not. I'm not saying all of them do it. Akhenaten was a realist, but Akhenaten was not a one-off when it comes to his realism. Let me slow down, because I know me saying that, and I know the next statement that's about to come out my mouth, it's going to make all the anti-African, all the anti-black scholars want to sharpen their darts. Well, come for me, bro. All of the pharaohs wanted their images to be the spitting image of how they looked. That's my statement. Hold up. Now I know we're not allowed to do blanket scholarism. So maybe I'm kidding. Almost all of the pharaohs. Can I say that? Can I say nearly all of the pharaohs? Can I say a good majority? Well, buckle up, buttercups. Because the truth is this: the overwhelming majority of pharaohs demanded accurate, recognizable portrayals, not symbolic cartoons, not color-coded fantasies. And Akhenaten himself made sure that you was going to be just as realistic with me as you are my wife, as you are my children. They did not want mystery. They did not want their image to be done in such a way where if they were walking down the streets of Kemet, the villagers would not be uncertain. And the villagers would not say, hark, who goes there? That is the realism that Akhenaten represented, that he worked to establish in his day. But it's not altogether that different from the realism that the other pharaohs sought to portray. So let's move further. Let's deal with, since that realism is very powerful, let's deal with Eurocentrics. Let's deal with Eurocentrism and the dark-skinned white theory that I made reference to earlier. Because that dark-skinned white Egyptian BS, ain't supposed to say that, narrative, didn't emerge from ancient artifacts. It was concocted by colonial, Eurocentric, colonial, and Arab-centric scholars for one main goal, what we call Abaism. Y'all heard of Abaism? Maybe I should put that one on the screen. Let me see. Shout out to Kaleem Shabazz for joining the chat. And he says, yes, vision plus commitment equals success. That's what's up. And he says, We need to use every opportunity to progress. The collective, we need to rise as one, surprising them with our timing. Shout out to Kaleem Shabazz for joining the chat and offering some very powerful and inspirational messages and information. Now, let me continue. The Abbaism. I wanted to put that on the screen just in case. Here we go. Okay, so let me edit this. Y'all might already know what it is. Uh-oh, something happened. Okay, so here we go. Delete that. Abbaism. So let me throw that on the screen. Y'all know what Abbaism is? Anything but African. Most of these colonial scholars, these Arab-centric scholars, all they want to do is deny African roots. So that's what Abbaism is. Meanwhile, real Kemetic voices and scholars. I'm going to give a shout out to Ivan Van Sertima. May the ancestors be pleased with him. I'm going to give a shout out to Cheikh Anta Diop. May the ancestors be pleased with him. Because these scholars made rigorous epistemic critiques, exposing how Eurocentric biases control what counts as fact and what counts as consensus. Let me say that again. They made rigorous epistemic critiques. Now, if you don't know epistemic, don't even worry about it. They made rigorous critiques. They challenged, they attacked meticulously. They exposed how Eurocentric and Arab-centric bias controls what counts as a fact. The Egyptologists, more often than not, if they know that the truth has to get out there, then the game they play is how do we control the truth? That's the very essence of propaganda. And so many of us don't really understand and can't perceive and notice it when it's smacking us in the face. Now, I am not espousing fringe theories. What I'm saying is not fringe. What I'm saying is well established. This is a call to recognize how knowledge in and of itself, and how the production of knowledge, how the dissemination of knowledge has been shaped by those with the authority and the power to do so. So let's be honest. This narrative, this dark-skinned white Egyptian narrative, it didn't vanish. It really didn't vanish at all. And it didn't go away because it was wrong. It tucked its tail because it was shown to be wrong in the public eye under public, academic, and non-academic scrutiny. But it didn't die. It still persists in many circles because it still serves a purpose. Scholars and institutions have historically controlled what counts as legitimate knowledge. And more often than not, they exclude African voices. They exclude Black voices. They ignore and deny evidence when that evidence affirms a Black African identity. When these voices are silenced, when these voices are dismissed, they use words like, it's unacademic. They use words like, it's fringe. And the one that they love to say is, oh, that's just that Afrocentric stuff. The trick of the mind is everything that comes out of their mouth is just that Eurocentric stuff. They are not the arbiters of, they are not the standard bearers of formal objectivity. They use their subjectivity as the standard. Their critiques are not about methodology, because more often than not, the Afrocentric scholar employs the methodology that they set up impeccably. They are about maintaining their authority and their comfort zones that their Eurocentric worldview has afforded them. So they frame ancient Egyptians as other, as white, but not white, just dark white. They obfuscate the visible reality of Kim. You see this, like you see the brothers, you see the portrait I got behind me. They literally look at that skin tone and say that's a dark white person. And then they say, well, you know, he's darker because he's outside. She's a little lighter. I can't get my fingers together today, so. Heteru. She's a little lighter because she's inside. This is the nonsense. This is the babble that comes out of their mouth, and they're supposed to be academic. So they frame all of this realistic evidence as something other than scholarly. But we've never given up the fight. So recognize when Afrocentrism starts coming down the pike, it's not fringe theory, it's correcting the record, setting it straight. It's reclaiming historical truth over falsehoods that have indoctrinated and permeated the walls of academia and the streets of America and elsewhere for far too long. Look closer. You'll see the concept of Kim, of black, as a unifying identity wasn't just an Egyptian thing. Here's where it really gets interesting. Ancient Nubians in the Sudan recognized their blackness. And it's carried through in the Meroitic text. The Meroitic text. My tongue tiedness gets to me sometimes. All across the Horn of Africa. Yeah, I know we got some Somalis that get out there and say, I know black. But you don't look at the fools in the community as the standard. The Somali ancestors used the word Medew, M-A-D-O-W. Let me put that on the screen. M-A-D-O-W. Y'all see that word right there. Bing. Y'all see that word Medew. The ancient Somali ancestors used the word Medew to describe dark skin. They didn't say white. They didn't say light. In the Arab world, classical Arabic has the word Aswad, A-S-W-A-D. Even in Uganda, Bantu languages like Luganda use words like Mukade to describe the dark hue of the people in that region and non-human objects. What does this mean? So what? This shows a broad, regional, continental-wide recognition that blackness, real, visible, and cultural blackness, it was understood and it was named long before modern racial categories, long before colonial value systems on racial categories were imposed. Scholars who try to erase or confuse this are not discovering nuance, they're obfuscating reality. My last word on this section of our conversation, let me sum it up. This is not just about Kemet. The recognition of blackness as a real, named cultural identity spans across Nubia, the Horn of Africa. It's even in the Arab world. It's in Uganda. It's in Tanzania. It's here in North America. That's Canada, the US, and Mexico. It's in South America. This has been the name of the game before any colonial or racist theorists showed up. So what I am talking about, my goal is to rekindle the ancient identity on ancient terms. Now, so if we go back to the language, and I'm gonna see if I'm gonna put this up there or not. So, like I said, we have the word Kim, and that's the word they use for black, be it the people, be it the country as a whole, be it the cows. Yes, as I said, we started off, they don't have a word for brown, but guess what? They have a word for white, and they didn't use it for themselves. The word for white is hedge, HDJ or HEDJ. The word for white is hedge. Now, sometimes, and there are some scholars that will say they also use the word tamhu. So let me see. Let me give you that word. Hedge and tamhu. So they got the word hedge, they got the word tamu. They could have used hedge if they looked, because they didn't have a problem with eyesight. If they looked at their skin and felt like it was white, it was light enough to be called hedge, they would have called themselves the hedgy or the hedju or the hedjet. They didn't do that. They didn't call themselves hedge, hedjet, hedgemet. No, they called themselves kemet. They didn't call their land, their soil, their dirt hedge or anything of that nature. Yes, some of these modern Eurocentric or Eurocentric trained, Arab centric or Arab centric trained scholars insist on splitting Egyptians into brown, tan, light skinned categories. And then they insist that it was the light ones, the light skinned ones, were the majority of the population, were the dominant ones of the culture, were the only ones to rule, except those in the 25th dynasty, and they hated to admit that one, rather than the exception, rather than the rarity. And they like to pretend that these divisions matter to the people themselves. That ain't scholarship. I don't care if the professor before you, like mine, the professor who was trying to indoctrinate me into this BS, was a PhD historian. I don't care if they got 2 PhDs, 3 PhDs. If they lying, they lying. That's not scholarship. That's obfuscation. That's professional obfuscation, plain and simple. The truth is this: the Kemetic people, the ancient Egyptians, understood themselves as Kim. They understood that this was a shared identity across the spectrum of darker hues long before the modern colonial value system of racial categories ever existed. Long before the value system of white supremacy, which assigned positive and negatives to the hues, ever existed. And how do I know this? The Ethiopians, the Sudanese, the Ugandans, hell, even the Twa people. When and if the ancient Egyptians, when and if the Kemetio would have encountered the Twa, you know what they would have called them? They wouldn't have called them hedge. They would have called them Kim. Now, if they encountered, let's say we put them in a time machine, if they encountered a blue-eyed blonde, they wouldn't say, that's Kim. They'd be like, that's hedge. Now, that's when Tamu might pop up. Light-skinned, white-skinned, foreigner, strange. They not like us. Now, again, I know there might be some social scientists that want to come at me and say the ancient Egyptians didn't categorize by modern racial constructs. They had their own system, rooted in a lived experience, rooted in a lived culture. Okay. Here's my pushback, because I don't deny that. Hold on. All right, shout out to Colleen Shabazz. There's a lot of work to be done. Yes, there is. I hope I'm doing a little bit of it. He says, yes, they denied us, so we should be denying them. I would choose deny. I would change deny to debunk. Some do try to take our heritage and perpetuate like it's theirs. And Colleen Shabazz says East Africans are good people for being part of the struggle. That's true. Like I said, a lot of people, sometimes people like to, they like to take, let me say it this way. We all know the anecdote of the drunk uncle. Now, I ain't throwing shots at nobody's family. Hell, there was a time in my family I was the drunk uncle. But you don't want the drunk uncle to be the representative for the whole bloodline. You don't do that. White folk would never let the hillbilly represent them on the public stage. They're not going to deny that the hillbilly exists, but they're going to say that is not the all of us. You don't let the clown who doesn't have the quite right mindset about his skin tone represent the whole group. But again, I'm digressing. Shout out to Kaleem Shabazz for the comments. My pushback is this. I don't deny that the ancient Egyptians had their own color constructs. I just think it is intellectually deceptive, dismissive, and disingenuous to say that the way in which we today in Black America, in Black Britain, in Black France, in Jamaica, Black Jamaica, the way we use the word Black is entirely distinct and unique from the way the ancient Egyptians did. For the record, I'm not saying every nuance of their system matches every nuance of modern racial thinking. I'm not saying that. But pretending that the divisions matter, the way the Eurocentric and the way the Eurocentric and Arab-centric scholars say they did, that, ladies and gentlemen, is pure fantasy. Now, why does all of this matter? Why am I talking about this today? Here we go. When we view ancient Egypt through a Eurocentric lens, we erase African identity and rewrite history to fit the enemy, the colonial narrative. Now, some scholars will insist that their interpretation, that their analysis is neutral. It ain't. They will insist that they are being objective. They are not. Because ignoring the obvious cultural and color realities of Kim, like I said, frankly, it's intellectually deceptive and dismissive. So restoring Kim as an identity, restoring Kim as a shared ancestry and culture, or linked to a shared ancestry and culture, not just skin color, is central to decolonizing our understanding. Now, here's where you can get ready for what some might say the irony. Some might go so far as to say I'm being hypocritical in my position. Fair-minded people might just say, are you contradicting yourself? So let me put it this way. Yes, restoring Kim as the identity, it is important. And it is important to attach shared ancestry and culture, not just skin color. I don't see that as a contradiction. But don't make a mistake about this. Let us be very clear for all of the, are you contradicting yourself, people? Be very clear. The skin color is a part of it because the skin color has always been a part of it. White supremacy does not like this hue, and they will always find ways to criticize it, to attack it, to dehumanize it, to delegitimize it, to detach it from serious scholarly thought, and try to erase it from the historical documented record. Now, it would take some psychologists, and I ain't one. So I can't tell you why they like that. But there's something about their brain that compels them to crank up the negativity whenever they find that skin color, Kim. Whether it be the shade or the shade of the, I can't get my fingers together, or the shade on, what is that? Tehuti's beak. Let me see. Let me see. What is Twain's Revenge says? I don't know how I find myself here, but I might as well drop some truth. Let me put that on the screen. So Twain's Revenge says, I don't know how I find myself here, but I might as well drop some truth. Modern paleogenetics have disproven the idea the sub-Saharan Africans were around in any significant numbers in ancient Egypt. I would like to see your source on that. Yeah, I'm sure you don't have one, but I don't want to make assumptions. If you got some sources, I'll take them. But you are dead wrong. Now, it takes courage for me to say that. It takes courage to challenge the old boys club of scholarship and reclaim history on its own terms. Well, there's a lot of us that got such courage. Now, Khalil Shabazz says the Kemetics traded with the Nubians and the Kushites. That's true. So, ladies and gentlemen, been going on for a little bit. So, but here's what I want to say to you. What if your entire understanding of race, what if your entire understanding of identity and color in ancient Egypt needs to be rewritten? What does that mean for how we see Africa, for how we see the Nile Valley, for how we see ourselves today? Again, Twain's Revenge. I understand what you're saying, but again, like I said, I would like to see your so-called research telling me just go look it up. I've already looked up some stuff. I'm not saying I looked up everything. I'm not going to come here and tell you that I am a supreme scholar and I know everything there is to know. But from what I have looked up, you're dead wrong. In as much as what I am saying is, well, again, let me slow it down. Let me slow it down. Because one of the tricks that these people like to do, and I don't know who this person is, so I'm not going to say he is or is not a brother. I'm not going to say he is or is not an Arab or a white person or whatever. But let me look at this and let me say this. Because he says he's trying to say that the sub-Saharan Africans were not around in any significant numbers in ancient Egypt. Now, again, I'm not making the argument. I have not used the phrase sub-Saharan African throughout this entire conversation. Now, I haven't used it for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's a great amount of scholarship that says even the phrase sub-Saharan African is not only a misnomer, but is another one of those racist terms that is used to partition black folk so that they can pick and choose who they want to recognize. There's already research out there that shows even if you remove the racist idea from it, to say sub-Saharan African, because what they do when they say that is they're trying to say that, for instance, West Africa is sub-Saharan African and the Horn of Africa is not sub-Saharan. But when you look at the geography, huge parts of even ancient Egypt are still tucked into the zone and the physical region that would be counted as sub-Saharan. Again, it is a misnomer. It's just a new, fancier term that they had to come up with after they got defeated with their dark-skinned white Egyptian nonsense. But this is the game they play. Every time they get defeated, they go back into their corners, they tuck their tail, but they shake it off, and they come up with some new words to push and promote the same dumb, racist, ignorant drivel. Now, I don't care if you say this is new from the last decade. It's easy to find. Just look up. Like I said, you can give me a link to something that you have. I will entertain it. Let me see. Shout out to now. Let me see. I don't want to get anybody's name wrong. So shout out to Nkosi Kulu. I hope I said your name correctly. Nkosi Kulu. Because he said Nubia. He said tough crowd. LOL. Nubia is a great name. Nubia is a great nation. Nubia is a great group of black people. Whether you want to call them sub-Saharan, Horn African, North African, or whatever other term. My goal today here is to get you to see that black is black. Just like we used to say in some of the old school golden era hip hop songs. You ain't got to be the same black in order to be black. You don't got to be West African black in order to be black. Black is black. Okay, Nkosi Cool. Nkosi Kulu said, I said it perfectly. It's a Zulu word. Shout out. That's dope. So again, I hate that trick. But like I said, it's the same. Like if I had a list of all the words, of all the phrases that Eurocentrics and sometimes Arab centrics use to try to separate the various manifestations of black. As I said earlier, if a Kemetic person, if we go put them in a time machine and we bring them into today's modern world and said, just use words to describe the folk that you see. If you put a sub-Saharan black in the lineup and you put a Sudanese in the lineup, the ancient Egyptian would say Kim on both of them. If you put a blue-eyed blonde European in the lineup, the ancient Egyptian would say Hedge. Or they might say Tom Who, because I don't know about that. Black is black. The ancient Egyptians don't have to be sub-Saharan African in order for them to be a black people, a black civilization, a black culture. West African, sub-Saharan African blacks don't have to look like Ethiopian blacks in order for everybody to agree that they're all black. Haile Selassie is black. Iman is black. They're both from the same nation. I believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe they're both Ethiopian. They look nothing alike when we only consider the hue. So we don't fall for that garbage. I'm sorry, Twain's Revenge. I hope you stick around. I hope you don't mind being here. I hope you don't mind listening and learning something. But we don't have to use, we don't have to recognize, we don't have to honor these terms that Eurocentrics come up with to try and separate us. And that's why I was coming to my closing. What if your entire understanding of the issue, race, identity, color, culture, ethnicity, in our modern world and in the ancient world, what if it's all wrong? What if it's skewed? What if you were to find out that these trick words that people have been using were done to detach blackness from the noble call of civilized? So what does it mean? What will it mean for you to see Africa, to see the Nile Valley, to see ourselves today as one similar, one same, one group of Chem, one group of Kemetic, one group of Kemite people? Now, shout out to Kaleem Shabazz. He says, we need to use this information to help us organize to make our lives better. We need to see that we should use the word Kemet as much as positively to decolonize our minds. Because Egypt itself is a Greek term, and that is absolutely without a doubt. I try as much as possible to use the word Kemet, but sometimes I fall back into using Egypt, but most times I say ancient Egypt, because I ain't really dealing with, I don't really deal with the pale Arabs that much. Not like that. Not in these types of scholarly conversations. I ain't got no problems with the pale Arabs. I've been to Egypt a couple of times. They treat me well when I'm there. So it's all good. They treat me well as a tourist. I ain't stupid. Now, let me say this. If you want to keep uncovering these hidden truths, if you want to keep challenging the history, the false narratives of history that they don't want you to know, y'all know what you need to do. Hit that subscribe button and we can keep the conversation going. Now, if anybody has any questions, if anybody has any further comments, drop it in the chat and we can entertain it. I had someone tell me that they were going to go live with me today, and then they just didn't show up. So I didn't put the live link in the chat. But I do appreciate you, brother, for showing up in the chat. We still got to get together for that live conversation. But again, ladies and gentlemen, this was my spiel. This was my take. This was my conversation, discussion, my talk piece. And so, with that being said, let me go ahead and turn that music back on, and I'm gonna get ready to get up out of here. This is your brother Shabazz. This is the proper perspective. I need you to hit the like button. Get the likes up. That's what they say. I need you to hit the like button. I need you to subscribe to the channel. And don't just when you hit the subscribe, the little bell pops up and it asks you, do you want all or do you want personalized? If you do personalized, that is your choice. That is your right. But if you do personalized, you're not going to get notifications. That's just how it works. So if you hit that subscribe button, hit the all. And that way, every time I go live or post the video, you'll get the notification and you can join into the conversation. So this is your brother Shabazz. This is the proper perspective. And we're going to float on up out of here. I appreciate you for conversing with me. I appreciate you for joining the chat. And Kaleem Shabazz says, I'm here, want to learn how to use a live chat. It was my intention to do good things. I feel you. All right, well, we can holler, we can holler off screen or whatnot, and I'll figure out a way to show you how to do the live, how to hit the buttons and all that other stuff. So just hit me, because you got my Facebook. So hit me there. And so, ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'm going to say peace to you. Thank you for showing up. Catch me on the next live, because I will be discussing Ancient Egyptians some more. I got a series that I'm about to crack open on Akhenaten. Today was like part 1. Let's set the record straight on some colorism about the revolutionary hero. But later, when we come back, I'm going to talk about how this monotheist really got things started. So hit those buttons and I'm going to see you later. Peace.